Hey everybody! A few months back I did a video talking about my time as a motion picture projectionist, and if you haven't seen that video you might want to check it out. It was really detailed and just went down into the weeds and talked about a lot of stuff that you might find interesting if you like that kind of stuff. I realized that that video was getting way too long, and so I decided to save the best for another video, and so that's what this one is. Today I want to explain something that was going on in the background that you didn't even know, and that is, how did we show the same movie in multiple theaters at once? And why would this be something that projectionists would brag about when they're talking shop? Let's get into it. Back in the 1980s and the early 1990s, I was a projectionist at United Artists in one of the local theaters in New Jersey. And that was one of my favorite jobs ever. I'll tell you, these days I work in IT, and whenever somebody says, "Hey Dad, what do you do for a living?" I start to explain, and I could see their eyes glaze over instantly as they begin to try to think of more interesting topics, such as paint drying. When I was a projectionist, that was a cool job. Everybody wanted to ask questions about that. They thought it was really neat. Heck, I would remember when people at my day job would come up to me and say, "Hey Ted, did I see you at the movie theater, like working up at the projector, looking at that little window?" And I would look at them and yep, that's what I do at night. Meanwhile, I'm wondering, how the heck did they look up there and see the little guy and recognize that as me? I could never figure that out. One of the first questions I was always asked was, "Hey, I guess you get to see a whole lot of movies, don't you?" And the answer to that was obvious. Was yes, but not for the reason that most people thought. The answer, as far as the way people thought, would have been a no, because nobody was going to sit there next to this clattering movie projector on the left side. You go deaf in your left ear if you try to watch a whole movie that way. In fact, you know that little window that's between the projector and the projection booth? That's soundproof. If we ever wanted to hear the volume in the theater or listen for any problem in sound, we would actually pivot that window and stick our head in and listen. So no, we didn't sit next to the projector and watch. We did have a little sound monitor, and occasionally, like if there was a particular action scene, maybe Indiana Jones was doing something cool and I was between projectors, I might say, "Oh, let me sit down and watch this." And so I'd wheel over a chair and turn up the volume on our little monitor and watch through the window for that scene, and maybe that's a 2-minute scene, and that was that. Again, nobody was going to listen to the projector clattering around in their left ear. So the reality was, though, it was on our time off. All of the theater chains in central New Jersey had an agreement that if you worked at one, you could go to all the others for free with your friends and family. You could always take one guest with you. And this was pretty amazing. Go to the theater of the enemy for free? Well, it worked great, because not only could we go to theirs, but they could come to ours. It worked like this. If I wanted to take my wife to see Ghostbusters, and let's just say that was showing at Regal, I could call my manager and say, "Hey, I'd like to take my wife to the 7 p.m. showing of Ghostbusters at Regal. Could you set that up, please?" And she would call Regal and say she had an employee and his wife who were going to be showing up for tickets. And at 7 o'clock, I would go to the box office and say, "Hey, my name's Ted. I'm from United Artists. Should have a couple passes for me." And sure enough, they would hand us the passes and we'd go right on in. It was great. Everybody loved it. And I saw hundreds of movies that way. But let's get to the meat and potatoes of this and talk about the idea of how movies were shown in multiple theaters at once. Remember many years ago, maybe when you were a kid, you're going to the movies, and let's just say you went to see Raiders of the Lost Ark. And so you go into the theater and you're watching the movie, and you got this gigantic soda like that big. And so halfway through the movie, you got to make a visit to the facilities. So you step out and you walk past. As you're walking down the hall, you look through the windows, just absentmindedly, and you see, "Oh, look at that, Indiana Jones, he's taking his whip out. I just saw him do that." And then you're just thinking, well, that's cool. Then you walk down to the next theater and you see, "Oh, look, He's pulling up, but he hasn't even got to the part where he's going to take his whip out. And maybe that was the last you ever thought about it. Fact of the matter is, the movie was showing and maybe 30 seconds off from one theater to the next, to the next, and to the next. You may have been seeing something where it was showing in 3, 4 theaters, and you might have thought, well, maybe the projectionist started one, went to the next, threaded it up, started that one, went to the next, threaded it up, and started that one. Who knows? But no, that's not what you were seeing. You are actually seeing the same piece of film running from one projector to the next, to the next, to the next, in this really cool ballet of film and just total Rube Goldberg that we called interlock. Now, in order for me to explain this, I'm going to have to explain a little bit about how the equipment we used worked. Here is a grainy photo of my projection booth at United Artists. We had 9 theaters. You can see on the right side there is an exit sign. On this side of the exit sign is theater number 1. And on the left, you'll see theater number 2. Then the next one down is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then they go around the back end, and we got 2 more on the side of the manager's office, the one that has the exit sign. And that's going to be theater 8 and theater 9. And they were different sizes. Like the one on the right was a little tiny theater, and the one on the left, theater number 2. That was our largest house with the best sound system and the best lenses and everything. I came into the business right about the time I'd say we were at the knee of the curve of advances in motion picture projection technology, at least as far as analog film went. There were things that came about afterwards, such as digital sound and maybe computerized automation, the system that coordinates the lights coming up and down and when the lenses switch over, things like that. But by the 1970s and 1980s, the bones, the basic structure of most of what we see in movie theaters and what we saw in movie theaters was all in place. All of the stuff that you think about when you think about seeing a projection booth in maybe a movie where you see 2 projectors side by side and smoky carbon arc lamps and stuff, that was all gone by the 1970s and 1980s. So by that time, there had been revolutionary changes that really made a difference and made the multiplex a possibility. This is a photograph of projector number 2. Again, apologize for all the grain. I had 400 speed film and it was really dim. And so I want to draw your attention to 4 separate things that are visible. On the left is the lamp house, and it has a xenon lamp in it. And those things explode if you don't diligently care for them and change them out after 1,500 hours or so. Carbon arc lamps were long gone. Attached to the front of the lamp house is the projector. And this one on theater 2 was capable of showing 70 millimeter films, although you had to swap in and out a whole bunch of parts. And I really don't think that these projectors have changed much since the 1950s. To the right of the projector itself is the tall audio rack. That's probably 7 feet tall, and that had all kinds of crazy stuff that made the amazing sound in our theater number 2. Before I get to the final component that's visible, I'm going to have to explain something about how film was shown. Maybe you all remember seeing projectionists in movies sitting by a brace of projectors, 2 projectors side by side, each one of them with 20-minute reels on them. And the projectionist was sitting in the middle and watching for that dot that would appear in the upper right-hand corner. And when the dot appeared, that was time to switch the reels. But the way that you see it in those films, that's long gone. They don't do that anymore. Maybe, I imagine there were projectionists that did like this. You see this guy here who's holding a 20-minute reel in his left hand, and he's holding a 60-minute reel in his right hand. And what I suppose happened, probably in the 40s and 50s, I bet you they were splicing things together so you'd have 2 big 60-minute reels. And you would only have one reel change during the whole film and not 6. Well, this all changed. In the 1970s, there was a revolutionary change in the industry, the development of what's called a platter system that made it so that only one projector was ever needed, and there was this extra side benefit, that is, you never had to rewind the film. So let's go back to that grainy photograph where I showed you the 4 different pieces. I put numbers on them. Let me call your attention to the fact that there's only one projector there. There's not 2. I already pointed out the lamp house, number 1, the projector, number 2, the sound rack, number 3, and now let's take a look at number 4. If I had to describe what that would be, well, doesn't that look like a platter system to you? That's exactly what it is. So let's take a close look at a platter system. Here's a photograph of a platter system that has the film sitting on the top platter, and you can see my block letters from 36 years ago saying that this is Rain Man and that the film is Dolby. So when we put it here, we had to set the audio for Dolby, and the lens that was going to be used to project the film was flat and not anamorphic or scope. Well, you can see that this is an interesting setup where the film comes from the very center of the platter, and it goes through all kinds of stuff and comes back and wraps itself around the next platter's core. What you have there is about a 3-foot wide pancake that's holding 2 miles of film. All the trailers are there, all the advertisements. We didn't have advertisements in my day, but all those advertisements are in there. The thing that tells you not to use your cell phone, whatever, that's all spliced together in that one giant pancake of film. In order to understand what's going on here, let's take a look at a bit of another old school technology that you might remember, the much maligned 8-track audio cartridge. So this is what it looked like on the outside. And if you remember when we had 8 tracks and maybe you're driving or something, you pop it in and you got to choose between 4 programs, but you couldn't rewind the tape. And that was key. You absolutely cannot rewind an 8-track tape. It is designed in a way that can only go forward. And the way these worked, it would click to the next track and you'd fall in the middle of a song inevitably. This is what they look like on the inside. And if you look, you can see this tape is wrapped around a spool and it's pulling out from the center. You see on the right side where the tape is being drawn from the very center of the spool, it comes down to the right and it goes around the playback heads, and then it goes back to the left around a pinch roller, and then it wraps around the original reel again. It's actually an infinite loop. The tape is spliced to itself, and that's why you can't reverse it. This weird looking setup only goes one way. You pull the tape out of the center and it wraps around the outside. And then over time, the coils of the tape magically sort of compress themselves. So eventually the tape on the outside works its way to the middle. And I never understood how that worked, but it did, because 8-track tapes worked just fine. Now let's take a look at the platter system again. You can recognize the DNA of the 8-track tape going on here. The beginning of the film is being drawn from the center of the platter and going through the projector and coming back to the center of the platter. Let me show you this on a short video. In this video, you can see the film coming from the center of the platter in the middle, and the film is drawn through this complicated little gadget that's called the brain. It has a little lever that detects when the film is being tugged on, and the film goes through all kinds of pulleys to the top, across over the projector, through the projector, across underneath, and then it comes in and it's being wrapped around the top platter. And that is how a platter system works. The big distinction between this platter and the 8-track tape is that instead of wrapping the film around the same platter, it actually goes to a new platter. And there's a reason for that. The film doesn't automatically pack itself down nearly as nicely as 8-track tape did. In fact, they had platter systems that could do that in one infinite loop. And they had like this arm that would pack the film as it was rotating around. I never actually saw one of those in the wild, but I've seen photos of them, and I couldn't even find a picture of one online. Let me show you a video of a guy threading up a projector so you can see this thing in operation. Here he takes the brain from the empty platter and moves it to the center of the platter that has the film on it. And he pops that green ring, it's got 2 pins on it, from the center and puts it on the empty platter. Now he grabs the head of the film, threads it through the brain, and the brain is actually going to drive the motor. So as he pulls on the film, that little sensor on the brain is telling the platter, turn and feed more film. So it's an automatic mechanism. And notice now he gets to the platter again from the projector, and he's going to run through this little 3-pulley thing. And you see this arm right here. This arm is actually serving a similar purpose on the take-up. The arm is going to sense when the film is going slack, and it's going to turn the motor of the take-up platter to automatically draw the slack. And now he threads up the projector itself. Let me highlight something here. The platters run independently. The platter that he pulled the film from knows nothing about the platter that is taking up the film. In fact, and this is a key point, you could pull the film from a platter system on the right of the projector, run the film through the projector, and then have it go to a take-up on a platter on the left side of the projector. That's important. And you might say, why would anybody want to do something like that? Well, that is exactly what you're doing when you set up what we called interlock. Because you would take the film, run it from the platter through a projector, go over to another projector, run it through that projector, and then run it to the platter system on the side of that projector. This red square that I put on the picture, that actually is showing these pulleys that are in the ceiling. And you can see there's like a swing arm, and there's this, it's a loop of film that's just there to hold the swing arm up and out of the way. But what it turns out to be is there's 2 pulleys in the ceiling and a little swing arm. And this serves as kind of a buffer, an accumulator, so that film going across from one projector to the other will go through that, and the swing arm will keep tension on it. And there's a little bit of slack so that they could be slightly off and there's not going to be danger. The projector motors themselves were designed to run in synchronous. I don't know how they did that. They may have been synchronous AC motors tied into the 60 cycles, or maybe they were just super well designed, or maybe they had some kind of a signal that was being sent. I don't know. What I do know is that in our projection booth, we had 2 separate interlock buses that ran the entire length of the booth, and every projector had a switch on it on the control panel that said A, B, and there was a middle position which was none, and that was for interlock. And if you went to any number of projectors and flipped that switch to the A position, all projectors that were attached to the A bus would now be interlocked, and that meant that everything on them would run synchronously. The lights would come on at the same time. The power switch, if you hit the start button on a projector, all 3 or 4, however many were done, they would all come alive at the same time. The motors would start, and the motors would be perfectly synchronized. And all the alarm systems, the stuff at the bottom of the projector, the fail-safe levers, the detected film breaks, that would all be interlocked. So if any one of the projectors detected a break, the whole shoot match would come down and all the alarms would go off on all those projectors. It was designed to be very safe, and this was a method that many theaters used. It was used all the time to be able to take one print of a film and show it in 2, 3, or 4 movie houses. A print of a film was expensive. Back in my day, I remember hearing that a 35 millimeter print was a couple $1,000s. That would have been in 1980s dollars. We didn't do this that often at my theater because it was, although it's a very well understood process, the machinery is designed to do this, it still puts more wear and tear on the film, and there's a lot more risk for doing dumb things like scratching the entire film by maybe running it over some sharp surface or getting dirt in the system. This is, so we didn't do this that often. It was much more common that we would have maybe 2 copies of a film. For example, when the original Batman movie came out, we showed that in 4 theaters. We had 2 prints of the film, and we ran those on interlock from theater 2 to 3 and theater 6 and 7. And when the opening weekend passed and the popularity of the movie started to fade a little bit, we then would show it maybe in our 2 largest theaters alone with the 2 copies we had. So we only used interlock when we really needed to do it, because it just, again, it was something that was a kind of a dodgy setup. And that's really where I'm getting to here. It was, at our theater, we didn't have dedicated projectionists, union projectionists. Those of us who did this, we were trained by some other guy who showed us how to do it. We did not have the skills of the mythical union projectionists, those guys who worked on Long Island or in the city that made huge amounts of money, that could do all kinds of crazy stuff and knew the machinery down. No, that wasn't us. We were just ordinary Joes. And quite often during slow times, it was just the managers running all the equipment. They all knew how to thread up projectors, but I wouldn't want managers having to do something complicated like thread up an interlock setup, because you're just asking for trouble. It's not their area of expertise, and mistakes are going to be made. Something's going to go wrong. So we really didn't use it as often as a lot of theaters did. But that said, every projectionist remembers the longest interlock setup they ever did. This is just something, you just remember this, because it comes down to, and not only was it kind of funky to hook up multiple projectors, but you probably didn't have all the pulleys set up, everything set up for something as large as maybe 4 or 5 or 6 theaters. In our theater, the guys who were there before me told me that the longest interlock they had done was for Fatal Attraction, and they said they ran 5 theaters at once, and they had to do it going around the bend. They ran 3 theaters side by side, and then they had this janky setup where the film went through pulleys and stuff and went around the corner and came back to the other theaters. What they used was these things that are part of the platter system, a thing called a makeup table. It's a little tiny table that you wheel over next to the platter, and you put your film reels on, and that's how you load the platter. Here's a picture of one in its natural habitat next to its platter. This is not a Christie platter, the ones we use, but this is just an example of where you would set the thing. Here is an illustration of a Christie makeup table, and you notice it's got this tall arm that has a pulley, and that was what they would use. They would wheel a couple of these makeup tables into position and run the film over that pulley on the top and just hope everything would work. And cross their fingers and their toes and go press the start button and listen as 5 xenon bulbs came to life and hope nothing broke. You can understand why back in the day, this is an area where projectionists would strut their stuff. We didn't have we didn't go to projectionist conventions, or we didn't all party together, but we didn't treat each other as the enemy. It was, even though it was a competition, I would go over to like a General Cinemas theater and maybe borrow a bulb from them. And same thing, they would come to us and get supplies from us. And occasionally there would be a film that would be going from one theater to the next, and we didn't want to wait for the distributor to pick it up and drop it off, so one of us would just drive over and toss it in our car. Well, this meant that we all knew each other. It was a small group, and we'd sit down and talk shop, and guess what topic would come up? There was always somebody who would start talking about interlock, and we would talk about, man, back in the day, and it was like a fish story, but just like this and this and this, and keep getting bigger and bigger. But 5 was actually the limit I ever heard of in my theater, and the most I ever actually ran was 3. And that was with, I think we did that on Ghostbusters too. The reason we didn't do more than 3 was because usually we would have 2 prints and do 2 and 2. So that's why a silly film like Ghostbusters 2 would get 3. That's because we only had 1 print of that. Let me show you a video of some guys taking this to the extreme and just doing an interlock on 16 projectors. This is crazy stuff. And now the guy is going to press the start button, and you'll see on the status lights as they all start coming online. And there it is, all the projectors are running, and these guys are sweating whether it's all going to work. And you'll see as we walk through the booth, the film actually going from one projector to the next projector to the next to the next. And we've got it going down the hall. And so here we go. We're in one of the movie theaters, and what they did is they waited till one of the sensor tapes went past the sensor and triggered the automation. It opened the curtains and turned the lamp on. Now we'll just keep on going. Look at all that film at the ceiling. All these projectors are chewing on the same film, and it's probably going to take 20 minutes for the beginning of the first trailer to make its way to the last projector in line. And I got to tell you, this is just a crazy flex. Nobody would actually do this in real life. Think about the amount of time it would take to set this up, to make all those fiddly adjustments, to get all those little pulleys just right, and to make sure you had everything clean, there was no grit anywhere, you weren't going to scratch the film. This was just, let's do this to see if we can. We keep going down the booth, and get further along, we see we actually go down the hallway now. And of course, they had to make sure the film wasn't scraping against the doorway. And when all the places where anything could rub against it, they've set up these little tables, and the little makeup tables I was telling you about. And the film is going across little pulleys there. It's probably going over maybe 50 pulleys on its way between all of the various projection booths and projectors. And here's the other booth, and there's the film, and it just keeps on going. And look, it's going down and into yet another area. This is certifiably crazy. These guys, I think they win the prize for the most projectors run on interlock. Now, the fish story contest, these guys win. That's all I've got for you today. And thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next time around. Now go out and shoot a roll of film.